10 Weirdest Unsolved Disappearances That Nobody Can Explain. Every March and April, dozens of cities across the southern portion of North America are inundated with college students. Excited to take a break from studying, they fill their days with beaches, bikinis, and booze. Tragically, some of these young people also fall victim to murders and mysterious disappearances. 1. Kim Vacarro and Lisa Iseman, two young women found beaten to death and dumped in a Florida river, have been identified as roommates at the State University College at Buffalo who disappeared last week on a spring break, hitchhiking trip to Fort Lauderdale, authorities in Florida said yesterday. In an apparently unrelated case, another young woman, a student at the State University at Albany, also was reported missing en route to Fort Lauderdale, whose sun-washed beaches attract tens of thousands of college students from across the country during the spring holidays. The dead women, found last Tuesday in the Hillsborough River near Tampa, were identified by the Hillsborough County Medical Examiner's Office in Tampa as Lisa Iseman, 20 years old, of Fairport, NY, near Rochester, and Kim Vacarro, 20, of LaGrange, NY, near Poughkeepsie. Both women, who were identified by dental records, had been slain by heavy blows to the head, according to the medical examiner, Dr. Peter Lardizabal. He said tests to determine whether the partially clad victims had been sexually molested were incomplete. The police said that clothing and possessions of the two women, including about $200 they had at the start of their trip, was missing. "We're sad and horrified," said Dr. Bruce Johnston, president of the State University College at Buffalo, which has more than 10,000 undergraduates. "We do sponsor a bus trip to Florida, which they were originally going to take," Dr. Johnston said in a telephone interview. "But they changed their minds, evidently. We certainly do what we can to discourage hitchhiking, and I don't think it is particularly prevalent, especially not among the women students." Dr. Johnston said he believed that both women lived in an apartment off campus. Because the school was closed for spring break, he said he did not have access yesterday to academic records and had no information about their programs of major study and other campus activities. A relative of Miss Vacarro said she was the youngest of 8 children, grew up in New Rochelle, NY, in Poughkeepsie, and graduated from Arlington High School in Poughkeepsie in 1982. She was a junior at Buffalo State, studying to be a social worker. The relative said Miss Iseman was also a junior and was majoring in special education. The two women were last seen in Buffalo on March 29 as they climbed into a tractor-trailer truck on the first leg of their journey to Fort Lauderdale, where they had agreed to meet the third roommate, Evelyn Berkowitz. 2 days later, they had not informed their families and had told only a few friends they were going to Florida, investigators said. A friend received a postcard from Miss Iseman and Miss Vacarro that had been mailed in Hagerstown, MD, near the Virginia border, on March 30. After that, there was no word until the bodies were found last Tuesday by 2 fishermen in an isolated stretch of the Hillsborough River, northeast of Tampa, which is on Florida's Gulf Coast about halfway down the state. "It's an undeveloped area," said Lieutenant Kenneth Dodge of the Tampa Police Department. "The only thing out there is the river and some woods." Both victims were found floating in the water. Miss Iseman's body, clad only in a blue t-shirt, was pulled from the river about 400 yards west of a bridge on Interstate 75 at about 6:30 a.m. by a retired Tampa police detective, Harry Wolf. "The area is so remote, I knew it had to be a body dumped from the bridge spans," Mr. Wolf recalled. About 2 hours later, at a spot 300 yards from where Miss Iseman was found, another fisherman, John Green, found the body of Miss Vacarro, also clothed only in a t-shirt. The victims had been in the water for about 2 days, according to the medical examiner. The women were not immediately identified. Miss Iseman's father, Paul, had filed a missing persons report on his daughter after learning that she had failed to arrive in Fort Lauderdale to meet Miss Berkowitz, and law enforcement agencies along the East Coast were alerted. Dental records were used to confirm the identity of Miss Iseman on Friday evening and of Miss Vacarro yesterday afternoon. In the investigation of the murders, Tampa Police and New York State Police investigators were attempting to trace the route and actions of the victims from the time they left Buffalo. Miss Berkowitz, of Merrick, LI, told United Press International on Friday that she had been totally against her friend's plan to hitchhike to Florida, where they planned to spend the spring break that was to continue through the Easter weekend. She said Miss Iseman had armed himself with a knife for protection, while Miss Vacarro had an ordinary table knife. along with a fork and spoon. The third New York student missing en route to Fort Lauderdale was identified as 22-year-old Karen Wilson of the State University of New York at Albany. According to George Corlius, a spokesman for the Broward County Sheriff's Office at Fort Lauderdale, Miss Wilson was last seen March 27 as she left a tanning salon in Colony, NY, wearing a white shirt, blue jeans and a waist-length wide jacket. 2. Stacy Madison and Susan Smalley. My daughter still has not been found and I can't stop looking for her, she said. Madison just wants to know what happened to her oldest daughter, Stacy. As their classmates from Carrollton's Newman High School started spring break, Stacy and her friend, Susan Smalley, disappeared March 20, 1988. Volunteers passed out hundreds of flyers with the girls' pictures on them at shopping centers, but the two high school seniors seemingly vanished without a trace. With no credible leads and a stalled investigation, their story soon faded from the headlines. I think this case has languished for too long, said Sean Sutherland. Almost 22 years after Stacy and Susan disappeared, Sutherland has revived their case. As a 1982 graduate of the same high school, he was drawn to their story. Sutherland briefly met Susan before she disappeared when she worked as a hostess at the Steak and Ale restaurant in Madison. Over the last 7 months, Sutherland, who is a paralegal, has spent his own time and money conducting an independent investigation that he recently self-published in a book titled This Night Wounds Time: The Mysterious Disappearances of Stacy Madison and Susan Smalley. In the book, the original Carrollton police detectives working the case, who have since left the department, admit Stacy's boyfriend was never entirely cleared in the case. As far as they know, his family and friends were never pressed and they should be, Sutherland said. Her boyfriend, who is not mentioned by name, confessed to his new girlfriend that he killed the two girls, and then immediately recanted. Investigators stopped pursuing him after he passed a polygraph. Madison thinks Carrollton police did the best they could with the knowledge they had in 1988, but she isn't convinced her daughter's former boyfriend had nothing to do with the disappearance until he's finally cleared. Maybe he did exactly what he told that girl he did do, that he hit them both over the back of the head and killed them. Then he buried their bodies and took the car back, she said. Madison doubts Stacy or Susan are still alive. Their disappearance remains one of the oldest unsolved cases in Carrollton. It's still classified as missing persons since there is no evidence of a homicide. Their missing poster still hangs inside the Carrollton Police Department. Sergeant Joel Payne said the case remains active, is assigned to an investigator and leads still trickle in, but detectives wouldn't reveal whether they're still following up with Stacy's former boyfriend or taking any other steps for investigative reasons. Payne and Madison hope Sutherland's book, which he is selling at cost, generates new leads in the unsolved mystery. For now, more than 2 decades later, it's still a story without an ending. Decades. 3. Brian Shaffer. 11 years ago today, Brian Shaffer vanished and left a wake of unanswered questions that have tormented the people who want to find him most. Derek Shaffer still wears a green missing person bracelet with his brother's name. Derek lost his entire immediate family in short order. Cancer took his mom. 3 weeks later, his brother disappeared. And about 2 years after that, his father, who searched hardest for Brian, was killed by a falling tree branch in a windstorm. Now, Derek and his wife, Maureen, are left to shoulder the emotional toll of Brian's unknown fate. Alexis Wagner waited in Brian's apartment alone for 2 days after he went missing, hoping that she and her boyfriend would get on a plane that day headed to Miami, where Brian hinted he might propose. But he never came home. Wagner soon became the beautiful face of a frantic search that gained national attention. As time passed, she moved beyond the bewildering unknown that imprisoned her, but she still occasionally finds herself online, searching for answers that may never come. Sergeant John Hurst would awake to 3 a.m. phone calls from Randy Shaffer, sometimes for updates on his son's investigation, other times just needing a friend. No case has consumed Hurst like Brian's. There were hundreds of interviews, thousands of hours watching video and countless dead ends. Even after switching police units and jobs, Hurst kept the case, remaining the lead investigator on a case still swirling in questions. Did someone murder the handsome 27-year-old Ohio State University medical student? Did the death of his mother and stress of medical school cause him to run away from his life? Did he kill himself? Is he still alive? Shaffer went missing after a night of drinking with friends on April 1, 2006. But those closest to him and the search for him often have been the ones lost in the mystery. Everybody has a theory. Hearst said, "We have been able to answer a lot of questions and rule things out, but the ultimate mystery remains. What happened that night, and where is Brian?" It was the beginning of spring break for Ohio State students on March 31, 2006, and Brian Shaffer wanted his family to celebrate the beginning of vacation with him and friends that Friday night. He invited his brother, Derek, and Derek's wife, Maureen, to meet him at the Ugly Tuna Saloon after their date at the Funny Bone Comedy Club. But the show ran late, and the high school sweethearts decided they were too tired to visit a crowded campus bar on High Street, so they drove straight home. "I thought about that night over and over and over for 10 years, said Derek, now 34. "What if I had been there that night? Would things have been different? Would my brother still be here?" "I've carried that guilt around for a while." Grainy video footage shows Brian entering the Ugly Tuna that night, but it never shows him exiting the bar. It shows Brian at the top of the escalator outside the bar at about 1:50 a.m. talking to women who his friend, Clint Florence, knew from Ohio State. Brian walks back inside the bar after the women leave. Florence later told police that he had seen Brian after he returned inside the bar and said they were planning to leave, but he lost track of him. 2 nights later, Derek received a call from his dad saying Brian was missing. Derek used to believe there was a chance his brother might still be alive, but he never thought that Brian just ran off to escape his life. Florence initially cooperated with the investigation but then hired an attorney and refused to take a polygraph test or talk further with police. He couldn't be reached for comment. "If I saw him I'd say, 'Where the hell is my brother?'" Derek said, "If anyone knows whether he is still alive, or if something happened to him, it's Clint." The brothers had never been closer than after their mom, Renee, lost her fight with cancer about 3 weeks before Brian went missing. Brian was the one blessed with a charm that attracted attention from just about everyone. Derek was more introverted and content with a smaller group of friends and Maureen, whom he married in 2009. At first, Derek thought his brother was just sleeping off a long weekend at a friend's house, or that he was playing some kind of practical joke. But that all changed when he saw police at his brother's apartment and learned that all of Brian's possessions, even his glasses, remained untouched. Derek joined in many of the massive searches for Brian around the campus area and the Olentangy River. He called Brian's cell number hundreds of times for about a year, praying that he would hear his voice one more time. "We never could have believed then that 10 years later we still don't know what happened to Brian," Maureen said. "It's been so hard watching Derek go through this, but we had to get back into our normal lives." Derek and Maureen now live in Canal, Winchester with their 2-year-old son. Derek continues his work installing electrical and communication systems for businesses around Central Ohio. It's hardest for Derek when he hears news reports that someone else has gone missing. That was the case last month when Joseph LaBeau Jr., a handsome 26-year-old, went missing after leaving a bar in the same area where Brian went missing. "It just brings all the pain from Brian back again," Derek said. "How long will it be before we know something? 10 years? 20? 30? Never?" 4. Brittany Drexel. Brittany resided in Rochester, New York in 2009. She was a junior at Gates Chili High School, where she was a star player on the soccer team. Her parents are legally separated and Brittany lived with her mother, but saw her father frequently. In April 2009, Brittany asked for her mother's permission to travel to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina for spring break with her friends and longtime boyfriend. Her mother said no. They argued about it, and Brittany got permission to go to a friend's home. She went to Myrtle Beach in spite of what her mother said. Her mother was unaware of this. She thought Brittany was staying with a friend locally. They spoke several times on the telephone after she arrived in South Carolina. Brittany's mother didn't find out where her daughter really was until she was notified that Brittany had disappeared. Brittany's friends last saw her Bar Harbor Hotel in Myrtle Beach at 8 p.m. on April 25, 2009. Brittany walked more than a mile to the Blue Water Resort on Ocean Boulevard, where other friends were staying. Surveillance cameras there show her going into the resort, then leaving sometime after 8:30 p.m. At 9:15 p.m., she sent a text message to one of her friends saying she was going to see a friend who was staying at another hotel. She has never been heard from again. She left all her clothes behind at her hotel room. Her beige purse and pink cellular phone disappeared with her. The phone's last signal was near US 17 and the Charleston County line the night Brittany went missing. Since then its battery has died. In the summer of 2016, investigators announced they believe they know what happened to Brittany, and named a suspect in her case. They believe she was held against her will for 4 days before being murdered. A witness, Taquan Brown, testified he'd seen Timothy D'Shawn Taylor and several other people sexually assaulting Brittany at a drug dealer's stash house in Clelandville, South Carolina, a small town about 60 miles south of Myrtle Beach. Timothy's father, Sean Taylor, was also present. Police believe Timothy planned to force Brittany into prostitution, but after her disappearance received widespread publicity, he decided to kill her. At one point, Brittany tried to escape and ran from the house, but she was caught, pistol whipped and taken back inside. Brown says he later heard 2 gunshots and later saw Brittany's cloth-wrapped body carried out of the house. It was supposedly dumped in one of the many local alligator pits. A photo of Timothy is posted below this case summary. He would have been 16 years old at the time of Brittany's disappearance and is currently awaiting trial in a 2011 robbery case. He was the getaway driver in the robbery of the restaurant. He had already been convicted of the robbery in state court and sentenced to 18 months of probation, which he completed, but he was charged again in federal court and could face a life sentence. Federal prosecutors don't usually charge people who were already convicted in state court, but they did so in this instance in part because of his suspected role in Brittany's disappearance. Timothy maintains his innocence in Brittany's case and, due to lack of evidence, he has not faced charges in connection with her disappearance. He claims he doesn't even know Brown, who is currently serving a 25-year prison sentence for voluntary manslaughter. Brown's account of Brittany's murder has not been substantiated by other eyewitnesses, although a second police informant says he heard about what happened from another eyewitness. A search of the house where she supposedly died turned up nothing. Authorities are searching for Brittany's remains. There are dozens of alligator pits in the Clelandville area. Brittany moved frequently during her childhood because her father was in the military. Her parents describe her as a very resourceful, strong-minded and independent young woman. She was upset over her parents' pending divorce, but they don't believe she ran away, as this is uncharacteristic of her and they don't think she would have left her clothes behind. Her boyfriend of 3 years agrees with this assessment. Brittany was studying cosmetology in high school and is very interested in fashion and wearing stylish outfits. Her case remains unsolved. 5. Sara Audience. Just before midnight Tuesday, March 13, 1973, 20-year-old Sara Audience of Morrison, Illinois, was found dead in room 429 of Rini Hall at the University of Iowa in Iowa City. Sara was lying partially naked on the floor under a clean bedsheet with her clothes strewn about the room. She died of suffocation from severely swollen neck injuries. She was also struck on the face and chest, possibly with a broom handle found lying nearby. The killer had washed her face and hair and left bloody water in the room's sink. Authorities refused to confirm if there was sexual assault. Sara was found by Brenda Simpson, a student from Waterloo, who was the only other resident staying on the 4th floor in the co-educational dormitory during the university's spring break. The room was home to 2 other co-eds who were gone. It had been made comfortable with a TV and stereo and was a popular gathering spot for students of both sexes. Sara's own room was 408, but she had a key to 429, and sometimes slept there. Sara gave up a trip with friends to Florida for spring break to earn extra money waitressing in the cafeteria of the University Hospital School, a rehabilitative center for handicapped children where she worked part-time. She planned to visit her family in Illinois later in the week. A grand jury heard testimony in the summer of 1973, and in September indicted 20-year-old James Wendell Hall for the murder. Hall was a part-time University of Iowa student from Toledo, Ohio, and a former football player who lived in a dorm across the street from where Sara Audience's body was found. He was arrested on Wednesday, September 19, 1973. His bond hearing was attended by a large support group, mostly of Iowa City's black community and fellow athletes. His bail was set at $50,000, which he could not raise. In December of 1973, he was charged with forgery in a separate case. At Hall's May 1974 trial, the prosecution introduced hair evidence. The Iowa Bureau of Criminal Investigation lab said hair on Audience's body matched Hall's and that hair on Hall's shoe matched Audience's. A bloody fingerprint on a faucet in the murder room was identified as Hall's. He was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 50 years. Appeals began shortly afterwards. Witnesses came forward saying that most jurors consumed alcohol with their supper at the University Athletic Club before going back for 2 hours of deliberation and finding Hall guilty. The defense claimed there was a mystery man seen with Audience that day who was not black. There were also allegations of racial statements made during grand jury proceedings, as well as an alleged juror's remark that Hall was guilty before a verdict was reached. The Iowa Supreme Court upheld Hall's conviction, saying that he had received a fair trial. In October 1977, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear his case. In 1983, an appeal was launched that claimed another man, suspected of 3 campus sexual assaults, confessed to killing Sara Audience. In late November 1983, Hall's conviction was overturned because the prosecution had withheld evidence. Hall was released from John Bennett Correctional Center at Fort Madison, Iowa, after spending 7 years in prison for the murder. No one else was ever charged with the crime. In 1993, a Davenport, Iowa, jury convicted James Wendell Hall of strangling 31-year-old Susan Hayek in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, on March 20, 1992. Sara Audience was the first child of Myra Choate and Robert William Audience. She was born February 9, 1953 in Morrison, Illinois, where her family of Dutch lineage was prominent and civic-minded. Her father was manager of accounting at the Morrison General Electric plant, one of the area's largest employers, and her grandfather was a county official. At Morrison High School, Sara was involved in drama, the school newspaper, a radio station and the yearbook. After graduation, she attended St. Francis School of Nursing in Peoria, Illinois, before transferring to the University of Iowa, where she was conscientious and serious about her nursing studies. Friends and teachers regarded her as a sweet, attractive, vivacious young woman with a good sense of humor. Sara's funeral was held March 16, 1973, at the Emmanuel Reformed Church in Morrison, Illinois, and she was buried in Grove Hill Cemetery. In addition to her parents and paternal grandparents, Harriet Tinbor and William Audience, she was survived by siblings Sandy, 13, Scott, 9, and twins Susan and Sam, 18. 6. Susan Jacques. A year ago today, 10 high school students from Trumbull, Connecticut, arrived in Fort Lauderdale, primed to play and party. 2 weeks later, their spring break had become a tragic memory. 9 of the youths had to return home without the 10th, Susan Jacques. The last thing anyone is certain of is that Jacques left her beachfront motel room alone in the middle of the night. 3 days later, on April 29, 1986, the 18-year-old's body was found about 35 miles away, floating in a canal west of Delray Beach. Little has been learned about her death, despite efforts by homicide detectives with the Fort Lauderdale Police Department and the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office, a private eye and a psychic. The mysterious case is compounded by an inconclusive autopsy, no known witnesses and no apparent motive. There hasn't been a lead to pursue for months now, said Phil Mondy, the Fort Lauderdale homicide detective assigned to the case. All the neat stuff detectives do. Fingerprint checks, crime scene evidence, we've done all that, he said. There's nothing left, The case is dormant but, like all unsolved homicides, remains open. Meanwhile, quietly and somberly, Jacques' family and friends continued to try to cope with the absence of the bright, college-bound girl. I think people can understand what we are going through without going into our personal emotions, said her mother, Louise Jacques. It's something you live with daily and we do the best we can. To minimize their grief, Jacques and her husband, Warren, a tree surgeon in Trumbull, have stopped calling police here to inquire about the case. Last summer, Jacques' graduating class planted a tree in front of their high school in her memory. Their slain classmate had been accepted at the University of Hartford. Jacques' best friend, Cara Buckley, the last known person to see Jacques alive, has gone on to the University of Rhode Island. She was always happy. I know that's what people always say about someone who isn't around anymore, but that's how she really was, Buckley said. Even if something happened to get her down, it wouldn't last, The case's baffling elements begin with Jacques parting words to Buckley at 3:30 a.m. last April 26. Leaving their room in the Mark 2100 hotel on North Atlantic Boulevard, Jacques told Buckley and other friends she was going for a stroll on the beach. Buckley said she begged Jacques not to go alone, but Mundy and others believe she really set out to find friends with whom she had been dancing and drinking earlier that night at another motel. Someplace along the way, Mundy theorizes between the motel and Sunrise Boulevard, she vanished. It probably was a stranger, probably an abduction by guile or by force, into a car. He said. Robbery and sexual assault have been ruled out as motives. When Jacques' body was found, she was fully clothed and still wearing expensive jewelry. Her body, found 3 days after she disappeared, was so decomposed that medical examiners could not determine the cause of death. There were no bruises, bullet wounds or other unusual injuries, Mundy said. Nor was there anything to suggest that the death was accidental. It's a real bizarre case, said Joe DiNardo, a Fort Lauderdale private investigator hired by the Jacques family. We're talking zero from the medical examiner. While police checked into the whereabouts of criminals known to prey on young women and pursued other leads, DiNardo and a longtime friend of Jacques, Lynn Pastor, set out on their own. I hit every hotel, every bar on A1A, every side street, from the Marriott up to Commercial Boulevard, DiNardo said. DiNardo said he came up with the names of several men who had checked out of hotels earlier than expected, and had returned to their homes in other states. Through various means he eliminated each as a suspect. Pastor, who grew up with Jacques in Connecticut and now lives in Fort Lauderdale, said she and DiNardo trekked to numerous bars and parties, carrying Jacques' photo, without success. About the best chance of breaking the case, one of only 5 unsolved homicides in Fort Lauderdale last year, is if Jacques' assailant is jailed in an unrelated case and boasts of killing her to another inmate, police said. Mundy, a veteran police officer, remains particularly frustrated over the Jacques case, because it isn't a typical whodunit, an unsolved murder for which police have several clues, suspects and possible motives. It is difficult, too, to deal with the family when you have so little to tell them, Mundy said. It's hard to explain to a family why their daughter is dead, said Mundy, who has a daughter just 1 year older than Susan Jacques. 7. Dana Bailey. This March marks the 30th anniversary of the murder of 21-year-old Penn State student, Dana Bailey. As if her murder itself wasn't mysterious enough, the case would see twists, turns, and dead ends along with mysteries within the mystery. On March 5, 1987, Shirley Bailey went to visit her daughter Dana at the apartment she lived in off campus at Penn State University. There was nothing that could have prepared Mrs. Bailey for the horrors awaiting her upon entering Dana's apartment. Sprawled on the floor on top of some bedding, was Dana's nude and lifeless body. Dana had been repeatedly stabbed and rope bindings remained on her. The scene must have been unimaginably horrible for her poor mother. Police investigators arrived at the scene and immediately found clues. The weapon used to kill Dana was a butcher knife that belonged to her. She was blindfolded. The stab wounds had been to her chest and breasts. Investigators determined that Dana had been likely killed in her bed, and then her body staged on the floor on top of bedding. It was posed in a sexually suggestive way, almost as if it was on display. Although there was a sexual aspect of the murder, neither rape nor robbery seemed to be a motive. Dana's engagement ring remained on her finger. The detectives turned their attention to the likely point of entry, the window. They believed that her murderer stood on something enabling him to reach up to Dana's elevated window and simply opened it and climbed in, surprising Dana as she slept. Next, the detectives took notice of the way her body was displayed and noticed that her body was in perfect view of a rooftop location across the alleyway. It seemed possible that the killer displayed Dana's body and then admired his handiwork from across the way. Additionally, there was an abandoned apartment undergoing renovations across the alleyway in which the killer may have stalked Dana from before or after the crime. There were no strong persons of interest, and the seeming lack of a motive set off a wave of fear around the Penn State grounds. Police went back to the day before her body was found, March 4th, to look for answers. Dana, who worked part-time as a waitress, had visited her fiancé in another town that day and was too tired to work, so she wound up calling out from the restaurant where she was due in at 5:30 p.m. She instead decided to go to a local fitness center for an hour or so, and then returned home to her apartment where she was last seen by her roommate. Her roommate left to go visit family. At about 8:30 p.m., Dana spoke with her fiancé by phone for about 30 minutes and then presumably went to bed. Sometime that night or early the next morning, her killer entered her apartment. The coroner established the time of death as being between late the night of March 4th and early morning March 5th. Detectives looked at Dana's friends, family and fiancé early on and ruled them all out as being involved in the murder. With no solid suspects and no clear motive, the case threatened to go cold, and that's exactly what happened. In March of 1989, at around the 2-year anniversary of Dana's death, Dana's father received an anonymous letter signed, "Concerned Officers." The letter accused a police officer, who I will not name, of being responsible for Dana's murder. The officer cooperated with detectives, and an investigation by the Attorney General's office revealed that the officer was not involved in the crime. Then, in late 2003, police received an anonymous letter offering information about the case. There were 2 persons named in the letter, but there was not enough information contained to bring the case to any kind of end. Along the way, there have been various suspects and persons of interest, but none strong enough to be arrested. One promising person of interest who was turned in by a tipster was a HVAC mechanic who had access to rooftops like the one across from Dana's apartment that the killer may have stalked her from. Like the other leads, this also went nowhere. Over the past decade, I had the pleasure of corresponding about Dana's case with Detective Ralph Ralston of the State College Police Department. Though not the original detective investigating her case, he was the first cold case detective to work on her case years later. Ralston never seemed to shy away from checking out any lead that came in regarding the case. Now retired from the State College PD, Ralston has his own theories and suspects in the case but can't share them due to the investigation being ongoing. One final note regarding Dana's case: the district attorney handling her case was Ray Gricar. Gricar himself would become part of a truly baffling mystery when he vanished in Pennsylvania in 2005. His car has been found, but no sign of Gricar himself has ever been found. In a couple days, 30 years will have passed since the senseless murder of Dana Bailey. The murder is still mentioned by students and faculty at Penn State. Her family wants and deserves closure. 8. Karen Wilson. Wilson was last seen in the 1600 block of Central Avenue in Colony, New York, on March 27, 1985 at approximately 7:20 p.m. She'd gone to the Colony Center and bought a red t-shirt and a blue t-shirt in preparation for an upcoming spring break trip to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. She may or may not have gotten a tan at the tanning hut. She had booked an appointment, but no one at the salon remembers seeing her there. Investigators initially believed Wilson got on a bus near the Butcher Block restaurant on Central Avenue and took that to Fuller Avenue, but it was later determined that she could not have gotten on the bus and probably walked to Fuller Avenue instead. Witnesses told authorities that she was spotted there shortly afterwards. Wilson has never been heard from again. Investigators have been unable to locate the personal belongings that she carried with her on the night of her disappearance. She had a gray cloth pocketbook, a blue nylon wallet with a Velcro closure, a green and white plastic bag from Upside Down, and possibly also a blue knapsack containing a yellow dress. Authorities believe Wilson probably walked south on Fuller Avenue towards the State University of New York, SUNY, at Albany, where she was a senior political science major. They think she was abducted somewhere near 6 Mile Waterworks, the entrance ramp to Interstate 90 westbound and the Northway. The night was very dark and the road not heavily traveled, and it would have been possible for a man to pull her into a vehicle in a matter of seconds without having any witnesses. A strange man was seen in the area at around the time Wilson vanished. A sketch of him is posted below this case summary. He has never been identified and is being sought for questioning as a witness, if not a suspect. Police looked into the possibility that Wilson had possibly traveled to Florida after her disappearance like she planned to, but found no evidence that she ever left New York. A possible suspect in Wilson's case died in an accidental house fire in 2013. Authorities stated they were never able to directly link the man to Wilson, and they didn't think he could have been involved because he reported to work as usual at 4 a.m. on March 28, only hours after Wilson vanished. Another SUNY Albany student, Suzanne Lyle, disappeared in 1998. 13 years after Wilson, her disappearance remains unsolved. Authorities have not found anything to link the two cases, but they stated the circumstances of the women's disappearances were similar. Wilson's family lived in Plattsburgh, New York in 1985. Her father was in the Air Force there. Wilson aspired to a career in the Foreign Service and had interned at the State Assembly. Her case remains unsolved. 9. The case of Rini Jose, a local man's spring break disappearance, has left many heartbroken but hopeful for his safe return. Family and friends of Rini Jose, the missing 21-year-old Albany native, gathered Sunday at Academy Park to raise awareness and support for the search. The walk for Rini was led by his family from the park to St. Peter's Episcopal Church, where a candlelight vigil was held. 8 weeks since his disappearance, this was the third local event held to raise awareness of their situation. Hundreds attended in support of the family. The events have helped to keep Rini's story alive, said Remy Jose, Rini's older sister and only sibling. Jose was last seen on March 3 in Panama City Beach, Florida, while on a spring break getaway with 22 classmates from Rice University in Texas, where Jose was studying to be a mechanical engineer. Originally from Albany, Jose is a Shaker High School graduate. He has not been seen or heard from since he left the beach house at 6:30 p.m. on the evening of his disappearance. Jose is a 5-foot, 10-inch, 185-pound Indian male with short, black hair and dark brown eyes. He's a very smart, kind-hearted, overall good person, his sister said. He's always the one who's cracking jokes and the life of the party. As his would-be graduation date quickly approaches, local efforts are being made to locate Jose. Rini deserves the chance to walk across that stage on May 17, his sister said. To date, the circumstances of his disappearance and his whereabouts remain a complete mystery. His clothes and personal items were found in a garbage can near the house. Florida police are searching for clues, while his family and friends are praying for his safe return. New York State and Panama City have been supportive in helping the family search, Rishma said. Rini Jose's college, however, was insensitive, she shared at the ceremony Sunday. Only after Albany's government stepped up and did the school take an actively involved role. His travel buddies did not act ideally either. None of his friends, with certainty, claimed to have seen him leave the house the night he went missing, Remy Jose said. Adding to the ambiguous nature of the situation, many of Rini Jose's friends left town within 24 hours of his disappearance, and authorities conducted interviews via phone. Remy Jose posed a question on behalf of the family. If the students rented a beach house for an entire week, why did they leave so hastily? She asked. His companions did not try to aid in the search effort, but local support is keeping his loved ones optimistic. Rini is a very bright kid. He's very studious, said Shaker Bazwa, who has known the family for about a decade. His only goal was to go to college, which he did, and unfortunately nobody knows what happened. Jose had a 4.0 grade point average at Rice University prior to his disappearance. As president of the Tri-City Indian Association, Bazwa has been helping the family in their efforts. Unsatisfied with the results so far, it's very surprising, they don't know anything other than he's missing, he said. That's the only thing they know. A lack of evidence and very few leads leave the case at a standstill, but the family is not losing hope. At this point in time, we are pleading for assistance from the federal government in the search for Rini, Remy Jose said. Hundreds of petitions to New York Sen. Charles Schumer and U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder were signed at the event Sunday, to be added to the thousands already collected. The family will be mailing them out shortly. Local government was present Sunday for the walk. It is a very difficult time, not only for Rini's family, but of the entire community, Albany Mayor Kathy Sheehan said. Our thoughts, our prayers, our concern are with you, addressing the family. We share your desire to bring Rini home, and we are walking with you in unity here today, because that is what a capital city does. It stands with its residents in times of need, and this is a time of need. Though information is scarce, going forward we're just going to keep searching for answers, Remy Jose said. As a family we will not stop until we find him. As a Rachel Taylor. In the early 1940s, at least one murder and more than a half-dozen assaults on women around and about the State College campus of Penn State had police running in circles and co-eds reluctant to walk alone on campus. The Penn State mystery begins on March 29, 1940, when the body of 17-year-old Rachel Taylor, a home economics major at the university, was discovered near the campus by a school janitor. Her head was bashed in and her body was mutilated. Almost immediately, police were reminded of another open homicide that occurred about 130 miles away near Tunkhannock, outside Wilkes-Barre. In that case, the body of 19-year-old Margaret Martin was found nude and trussed in a burlap sack. She had been tortured in a similar manner. At the time, police blamed Margaret's murder on white slavers who were forcing young women looking for honest work to become prostitutes in disorderly houses. In some cases the girls accepted the offer voluntarily, while in others the girls were subjected to threats and physical violence. The way Margaret was lured to a job interview was similar to how other girls reported being accosted by the pimps. When Rachel's body was found near State College, Margaret's murder had not been solved, and at first police believed the white slavery ring had simply moved west. Besides the mutilation, and the similarities in age between the victims, there was little to link the murders of Margaret and Rachel. A New Jersey resident who came to Pennsylvania as one of the 1,000 women on the 6,000 student PSU Central Campus, Rachel was known as a shy, studious girl who was pleasant, but who generally kept to herself. She had returned from Asbury Park to State College late on March 28, getting off the bus at 1:21 a.m. According to the driver, Rachel apparently encountered her killer while walking the half-mile from the bus stop to her dormitory. Her friends insisted that she must have known the person who killed her, because she was found 4 miles off her route, and was not the type of person to accept rides from strangers. The autopsy revealed that she had eaten shortly before she died, which strengthened the argument that she knew her killer. There were no restaurants open at that time near where she was dropped off and where she died. Rachel's wristwatch was stopped at 3:15 a.m., but it is unclear whether that was because it ran down or was damaged in the attack that killed her. In the days after Rachel's murder, police inspected more than 900 cars in and around the campus, looking for one that was blood-stained. They were unsuccessful. They then turned to the Penn State Interfraternity Council, asking the heads of each fraternity on campus to report anyone who was absent without explanation from 1 a.m. until dawn on March 29. At the time, half of Penn State's 5,000 male students belonged to a fraternity. Police found a blood-stained handkerchief at the crime scene, as well as a man's footprints in the snow, but those leads never panned out. Eventually, authorities abandoned the theory that Rachel knew her killer when interviews with as many friends as they could find led nowhere. Of course, there's nothing definite on the theory that she had been forced into the car, but we've questioned all of her friends, including the boys she knew, and they didn't pick her up, Detective Wilbur F. Leitzel told the press. But we're certain an automobile was used by the slayer. Nearly a year passed with no progress in the investigation of Rachel Taylor's murder when it appears the State College stalker struck again. This time, the victim survived. On March 21, 1941, Lena Waite was slugged from behind while she walked on a State College street. 3 days later, Grace Gray was similarly assaulted and knocked down. On June 12, 1941, Mrs. Ernest J. Teichert was struck down while she was in her garage and dragged down an embankment. Her assailant fled when he was spooked by a noise. A month later, 21-year-old Catherine Brian got the first glimpse of the stalker when she was assaulted on the streets of State College. The only description she could provide, however, was that he was clad in a shirt and dark trousers. The attacks appeared to move east after Catherine's assault, back toward Wilkes Barre. On August 2, 1941, Emily Williams, a 28-year-old student at State Teachers College in Lock Haven, Pennsylvania, about 30 miles east of State College, suffered a fractured skull when she was struck from behind by an unidentified male attacker. She was walking home from the movies when the man came up behind her and hit her with a blunt object. The investigation turned up a pair of similar attacks in Lock Haven around the same time that the State College stalker was clubbing women there. A 17-year-old girl was hit from behind on June 23, 1941, and on June 16, 26-year-old Dorothy Orner suffered a like assault. As quickly as they began, the attacks stopped. Police surmised that the stalker either moved away or was drafted when World War II began. Regardless, neither Rachel's nor Margaret's killings were ever solved, and no one was ever charged with any of the assaults. As for the Wilkes Barre white slavery ring, like so many other stories, News of the World at War blew that off the front pages forever.